Manchester, England, April 18, 1945, 09:23 hours. Lotte Schneider stands at the gate of Camp 107, hands trembling as a British Women's Auxiliary Corps officer checks her name against a clipboard. Through the wire, she can see a motor coach idling on the gravel drive. Civilian, not military. No bars on the windows, no armed escort visible. The officer looks up and smiles. "Ready then, Miss Schneider? Manchester's lovely this time of year. The museum should be quiet on a Wednesday. If this story challenges everything you thought you knew about prisoners of war, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from." Lotte swallows hard, her throat dry despite the morning tea ration. 6 months ago, she'd been a Luftwaffe signals operator, intercepting Allied communications in a bunker outside Bremen. 3 months ago, she'd surrendered to British forces, expecting summary execution or worse. Yesterday, she'd signed a form in German and English agreeing to a supervised city visit with 11 other women prisoners. No shackles specified, no chains mentioned, just a polite request to return by 1700 hours. She'd assumed it was a clerical error or perhaps a cruel joke. "Miss Schneider." The officer extends a small cloth purse. "Your allowance, 10 shillings for the day, tea, museum entry, perhaps a small souvenir if you're careful with it." Lotte takes the purse. The coins inside clink softly, real British sterling. And in that moment, holding money given freely by the enemy, she realizes the propaganda had prepared her for everything except this: dignity. For 18 months, Lotte had absorbed a consistent narrative. Capture by British forces meant forced labor in munitions factories, systematic abuse, starvation in stone cells, treatment designed to break bodies and spirits. Die Engländer kennen keine Gnade. The English know no mercy. The propaganda films had been explicit, shown weekly at the signal station. British soldiers depicted as barbaric colonizers, Americans as undisciplined savages, all Allied forces driven by vengeance and racial hatred. German women prisoners, they were told, would fare worst of all. The stories circulated in whispers among the Nachrichtenhelferinnen, the women of the communications corps. Girls who fell into enemy hands simply disappeared. No letters, no repatriation, no trace. So when the collapse came in January 1945 and British forces overran their position near Osnabrück, Lotte had steeled herself for death. She'd rehearsed how she would maintain dignity, where she would look, what she would refuse to say. What she encountered instead was a British captain who checked their papers, confiscated their equipment, and ordered them transported to a processing center near Hamburg. No violence, no speeches, just bureaucratic efficiency. The journey to Britain took 10 days, by truck to Cuxhaven, by ship across the North Sea, by rail to Cheshire. At each stage, Lotte waited for the cruelty to begin. It never did. Camp 107 occupied a requisitioned country estate near Chester. High fences, guard towers, administrative buildings, all the infrastructure of captivity. But also heated barracks, individual cots with mattresses and wool blankets, washing facilities with hot water 3 times weekly, and a mess hall that served adequate rations. Not luxury, not even comfort. But sufficiency, which was more than Lotte had known in the final months of the Reich. The treatment violated everything she'd been taught to expect. It demanded explanation, and explanation required questioning everything else she'd believed. British policy toward female prisoners of war was codified in a series of War Office directives issued between 1940 and 1944. The framework rested on 4 pillars. First, separate facilities. Women prisoners held in dedicated camps with female guards and medical staff, strict protocols for male guard interaction. Second, Geneva Convention compliance, adequate nutrition, medical care, recreational activities, male privileges, all documented meticulously for Red Cross inspections. Third, cultural access, supervised visits to museums, libraries, concerts, historical sites, designed to demonstrate British civilization while gathering intelligence through observation. Fourth, reciprocity. Every humane gesture documented and reported, leveraging better treatment for British women held in German camps. By April 1945, Over 2,400 German women were held in British camps across England and Scotland. Nurses, auxiliaries, communication specialists, administrative personnel, even a handful of concentration camp guards awaiting war crimes proceedings. Fewer than 40 had attempted escape. Mortality from mistreatment was 0. This wasn't sentimentality. It was strategy, enforced by bureaucracy and the cold calculation that well-treated prisoners become post-war ambassadors. But Lotte didn't know any of this when she boarded the coach that Wednesday morning. She only knew no one had chained her wrists. The motor coach winds through Cheshire countryside that looks nothing like the bombed ruins Lotte expected. Green fields stretch to horizons unmarred by craters. Stone villages cluster around Norman churches, intact and ancient. Sheep graze peacefully in pastures divided by hedgerows older than Germany itself. No rubble, no burned forests, no military checkpoints visible from the road. Beside her, Greta Zimmermann, former Wehrmacht clerk captured in Holland, presses her face to the window. It's untouched. How is it untouched? The Channel, murmurs Frida, a medical auxiliary from Munich. They stopped the Luftwaffe before it could do this to them. The implication hangs unspoken but understood by every woman on the coach. We failed. And because we failed, this survived. The architecture of British victory was not just military, but geographic. 22 miles of water that had absorbed the Luftwaffe's strength before German bombs could systematically devastate British cities the way Allied bombs had devastated German ones. Manchester had been hit, yes. Liverpool, Coventry, London, all had burned. But not like Hamburg, not like Dresden, not like Berlin. The scale was incomparable, and the evidence rolled past the coach windows in the form of villages that still had roofs. The coach enters Manchester through streets busy with morning commerce. Trams rattle along rails embedded in cobblestones. Lorries haul goods between factories that still have walls. Civilians queue outside shops, women in headscarves, men in flat caps, children clutching ration books. Everything normal, everything ordinary, everything alive. Captain Vera Atkins stands at the front of the coach, one hand on the driver's seat for balance. Ladies, you'll have 4 hours in the city center. Corporal Williams and I will accompany you, but we're guides, not guards. Stay within the designated district. It's marked on these maps. Return to the coach by 1400. Questions? A young prisoner named Kata, 19 and still terrified of everything, raises her hand tentatively. What if someone attacks us? We're German. They lost sons and husbands because of us. Atkins's expression softens in a way that makes Lotte's chest tighten. Then you report it to me immediately and I'll deal with it. But Miss Klein, I don't think you'll be attacked. The people here know you're prisoners. Most are simply curious. Some may be hostile. If they are, walk away calmly. You represent your country today. Represent it with dignity. The coach stops outside the Manchester Museum on Oxford Road. The door hisses open. Lotte stands, legs unsteady, and steps onto British pavement as something approaching a free woman. No chains, no shackles, no armed escort visible beyond the 2 uniformed women who carry no rifles. Just 12 German women about to discover what liberty looks like in a city that should hate them. The museum entrance is Victorian grandeur incarnate. Marble columns supporting a vaulted ceiling, brass fixtures polished to mirror brightness, the institutional smell of floor wax and old stone. A woman in tweed approaches, clipboard in hand. Mrs. Eleanor Peyton, the curator, perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair and the commanding presence of someone who has organized things for decades. Welcome, ladies. Captain Atkins tells me you're interested in our natural history collection. Lotte waits for hostility, for contempt thinly veiled as politeness, for the kind of cold civility that would be worse than open hatred. Instead, Mrs. Peyton gestures toward the galleries with genuine warmth. We've recently acquired some excellent geological specimens. The Egyptian wing has just reopened after being stored for safety during the bombing raids. She says it matter-of-factly. Bombing raids. Not your bombing raids. Not German attacks that destroyed our cities. Just a statement of historical fact. delivered without blame. Lotte follows the group into the first gallery, her footsteps echoing on marble floors. Display cases hold fossils, minerals, reconstructed skeletons of creatures dead for millions of years. Safe subjects. Apolitical. A young boy, 8, maybe 9, tugs on his mother's coat and points at the German women, their uniforms marking them as unmistakably foreign. "Mum, why are they wearing those clothes?" The mother kneels beside him and Lotte braces for the explanation. "They're German prisoners, love. They're visiting our museum today. Why aren't they chained up? Because they're not dangerous, sweetheart. They're just women who were soldiers, like Aunt Margaret was a soldier. The war is ending. We treat people properly here." Lotte pretends not to hear, studying a display case of trilobites with feigned intensity. But the words settle somewhere deep, in a place she thought had calcified beyond feeling. We treat people properly here, not because you deserve it, because we choose to. At noon, Captain Atkins leads them to a tea room on King Street. White tablecloths, china cups, the normalcy of civilian life presented as if it's not extraordinary. "Order what you like," Atkins says within reason. The 10 shillings should cover tea and a light meal. Lotte sits with Greta and Frida, studying the menu as if it's written in code. Sandwiches, scones, cakes, actual cakes in 1945, in a country supposedly starving under rationing. The cognitive dissonance is dizzying. The waitress approaches, name badge reading Miss Cooper with a notepad and a smile that seems unforced. "What can I get you, ladies?" "Tea, please," Lotte manages, her English careful and self-conscious. "And sandwiches. Lovely. We've got cheese and pickle or Spam and tomato. Spam's not glamorous, but it's fresh today. Cheese, please." Miss Cooper writes it down, then leans in slightly. "You're from the camp in Cheshire, then?" Lotte tenses. "Yes, miss. My sister's a guard there. Says you lot are quiet as church mice, never cause trouble. Not like the Italian men at Camp 52. She says they'd flirt with a lamppost if it stood still long enough." Despite herself, Lotte almost smiles. The casual humanity of the comment, the ordinariness of it, is more disorienting than hostility would be. Miss Cooper treats them not as war criminals or conquered enemies, but as customers. The tea arrives hot and strong, slightly bitter. Real tea, not ersatz. Greta takes a sip and closes her eyes. "I'd forgotten what this tastes like." Across the room, an elderly woman approaches their table. She's small, dressed in black, and Lotte braces for confrontation. "Excuse me," the woman says in accented but clear German. "I'm Mrs. Stein. I was born in Hamburg. I came to England in 1938. Lotte stares. "You're German?" "I was. I'm British now. But I wanted to say," she pauses, choosing words carefully, "I'm glad you're being treated properly. I know what you were told about this country. I hope you see now that it wasn't true." She nods politely and returns to her table before Lotte can respond. Frida whispers, "Did that just happen?" "I think so," Lotte replies, staring at her tea as if it might contain answers. A German Jewish refugee, who had every reason to hate them, offering reassurance. The world had inverted. After lunch they walk, 12 German women escorted by 2 British officers through Manchester's shopping district. No chains, no visible weapons, just women moving through a city. Lotte stops outside a bookshop, drawn by the window display. English novels, technical manuals, and, impossibly, a German-language edition of Goethe's Faust. She points. "May I go inside?" Atkins nods. "Of course. Just don't wander off." The shop is small, cramped, smelling of paper and dust and peace. The proprietor, Mr. Davies, elderly and bespectacled, glances up from his counter. "Help you, miss?" "The Goethe in the window. May I see it?" He retrieves it, hands it carefully. Swiss printing. Came through Red Cross channels. Beautiful edition. 2 shillings if you want it. Lotte opens the book. The German text stares back at her. Familiar, comforting, a piece of home in enemy territory. "I'll take it." She counts out coins from her cloth purse. British money, given freely. allowing her to purchase German literature in an English bookshop while wearing a Luftwaffe uniform. The absurdity of it breaks something in her. She hands over the coins, takes the wrapped book, and walks outside before the tears can start. Captain Atkins finds her on the pavement, shoulders shaking. "Miss Schneider, you gave me money to buy German books," Lotte says, voice cracking. "You let me walk through your city without chains. You treat me like I'm human. You are human. But we bombed you. We killed your people. My signals helped coordinate attacks on British cities. And you give me tea and books and..." She can't finish. Atkins lets the silence settle, then speaks quietly. "Do you know what vengeance looks like, Miss Schneider? It looks like becoming the thing you're fighting against. Britain didn't go to war to become monsters. We went to war to stop them." Lotte wipes her eyes with the heel of her hand. "I don't understand you people." "Good," Atkins replies. "Maybe that means you'll remember us accurately when you go home." They reconvene at the Manchester Art Gallery, another Victorian edifice housing centuries of British and European painting. Lotte follows the group through galleries hung with Turner, Constable, Rossetti. Greta stops before a pre-Raphaelite painting, Proserpine by Dante Gabriel Rossetti. The captured queen of the underworld holding a pomegranate staring out with resigned acceptance. "That's how I feel," Greta murmurs. Captured, held, but not mistreated. Just held in a place that isn't home. Mrs. Peyton, overhearing, approaches. "Proserpine was allowed to return home for part of each year. Perhaps you'll find the same grace." It's the kindest thing anyone has said to Lotte in 3 years. The coach ride back to Camp 107 is quiet. 12 women process experiences that contradict every certainty they'd held about British character and their own fate. Lotte clutches her copy of Faust, the bookshop's stamp still visible on the wrapping. Proof. Evidence that this day actually happened. "Did we really just spend 4 hours walking freely through Manchester?" Kata asks, voice small. "Without chains? Without guards holding rifles?" "We had escorts," Frida corrects gently. "Who bought us tea?" Greta adds. "Who let us browse bookshops? Who treated us like visitors instead of enemies?" As they pass through the camp gates, Lotte feels an unexpected pang. Not relief to return, but sadness that the freedom of the afternoon is ending. Captain Atkins stands as the coach stops. "Thank you, ladies. Your conduct was exemplary. Applications for next month's visit will be posted Friday. Lotte will apply. So will every other woman on this coach." That night in the barracks she lies in her cot and reads the opening of Faust by dim light. "Habe nun, ach, Philosophie, Juristerei und Medizin und leider auch Theologie durchaus studiert, mit heißem Bemühen." She'd studied propaganda and hatred and the certainty of British cruelty with hot effort too, and found it all to be lies. Over the following weeks, city visits continue. Liverpool, Chester, Birmingham. Each excursion follows the same pattern: supervised freedom, cultural exposure, civilian contact. Each cracks the propaganda shell a little more. Lotte is working in the camp library when the realization hits her fully. If they lied about British treatment of prisoners, about the chains that don't exist and the brutality that never came, what else was a lie? What about the camps in Poland, the rumors they'd all dismissed as Allied propaganda? What about the war itself, the reasons they'd been given for fighting? The questions don't have easy answers. Maybe they never will. But asking them is the beginning of something. Years later, decades later, in a letter to Captain Atkins that would continue until Atkins's death in 1987, Lotte would write, "You didn't just free me from physical chains I never wore. You freed me from the mental chains of believing my enemies were monsters. That was the greater liberation. That was what allowed me to become someone new." Repatriation begins in late 1945. Trains to Calais, ships to Hamburg, return to a Germany that exists only as rubble and trauma. Some go eagerly, desperate for news of families. Some go reluctantly, knowing what awaits. A few apply to stay. The British government allows it conditionally. Former POWs can apply for work permits, residency, eventual citizenship if they meet requirements and pass security vetting. Lotte applies in January 1946. She's approved in March. By April, she's working as a translator for the Control Commission in Manchester, the city she first visited without chains, now the city where she lives as something approaching a free woman. She rents a small flat on King Street, 3 blocks from the tea room where Miss Cooper served her sandwiches. She buys furniture with earned wages. She registers with a general practitioner. She joins a lending library. She becomes British in increments, one choice at a time. In 1948, she meets David Peyton, nephew of the museum curator, recently demobbed from the RAF, working as a civil engineer. They marry in 1949. Mrs. Peyton officiates informally at the small civil ceremony, beaming with matchmaker's pride. Lotte never returns to Germany permanently. But every year on the anniversary of her first city visit, she walks to the bookshop on King Street. Mr. Davies remembers her always. The German girl who cried, he says every time, smiling. "You still have that book?" "On my shelf at home. I'll never part with it." "Good. Some books are meant to be kept." When historians write about the Second World War, they write about strategic bombing and naval battles and the vast machinery of industrial slaughter. They write about millions dead and cities erased and empires collapsed. They rarely write about the bookshop. But Lotte kept the receipt. 1 copy, Faust German, 2 shillings, April 18, 1945. It's framed now, hanging in a house in Manchester, beside a photograph of 12 German women standing outside the Manchester Museum, unchained, tentatively smiling. Her grandchildren ask about it sometimes. She tells them, "It was the first thing I bought with money I didn't have to steal or beg for. The first choice I made as something other than a prisoner." The British didn't win the war with tea and museum visits. They won it with blood and resolve and the sacrifice of millions who gave everything to stop fascism. But they won the peace, at least the small Manchester piece of it, with something subtler. They won it by deciding that dignity was not a reward for virtue, but a baseline standard for all human beings, even enemies. That treating German women as humans worthy of respect didn't mean forgetting what Germany had done. That the absence of chains was more powerful than their presence. Lotte expected shackles, expected brutality dressed as British politeness, expected to be worked, degraded, eventually discarded. Instead, she was handed 10 shillings and invited to buy books in the language of her enemies, to walk through museums celebrating the civilization she'd tried to destroy, to drink tea with civilians who had every reason to hate her. It was the most devastating kindness imaginable, being treated as if you still had the capacity for redemption. True strength, it turns out, is restraint, and civilization is the choice to extend dignity when no one would blame you for cruelty. On a Manchester street standing outside a bookshop, holding Goethe in her unchained hands, the book was real. The money was real. The freedom, tentative and supervised but real, was real. She walked the city without chains, and the city, against all expectation, welcomed her, not with open arms, but with open doors. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.